Good afternoon and welcome back to Ljubljana Street Art Festival and conference format documenting, collecting and archiving street art. My name is Tjaša Poriber and I will be with you on the remaining two panels today, and we are very excited to welcome our first two panelists for the evening, and these are documentary photographer Marta Cooper and in conversation with Mitja Velikonja. Mitja Velikonja is a professor here in Ljubljana on Faculty for Social Sciences, and his main areas of research are political ideologies, contemporary political ideologies of Southeast Europe, in particularly Balkans, also subcultures, graffiti art, and post-socialist nostalgia. Marta, of course, needs no special introduction, but nevertheless, I would just like to say that she's an American photographer whose iconic images of graffiti and street art has really marked this field of art basically since the 70s. Without any further ado, I will give you the floor, and Mitja will present Marta and her work a little bit further. Please.
Thank you, Tjaša. So I'm extremely proud and honored to have this conversation this afternoon with Marta Cooper. First of all, I would like to thank organizers, Tjaša for introducing us, Institute for the Urban Questions and Kino Šiška, Anja and Sandy for putting us together. So, no, Marta Cooper does not need a proper and long introduction. I believe everybody in this room knows about her work that spans from 70s on at least three fields. First, from her books, an ice-breaking book on graffiti and street art, a kind of Bible, as we heard so many times, Golden Pot and so on, together with Henry Chalfant in 1984, and a few others about graffiti and street art that must be read, I believe, with another crucial book in the field that was published approximately at the same time, Craig Castleman's Getting Up Subway Art in New York, which we also collaborated with, participated some photos. Then hip-hop files from early stages of New York hip-hop, about the beginnings of the New York hip-hop scene, about big girls, about New Yorkers as such. The first one was about Tokyo tattoos. I didn't know about that, so this was a pleasant surprise. So this is one field, her books. The second field is her documentary entitled simply Marta, A Picture Story from 2019 that was also shown here in Kinovic, as I understood. But most of all, we know her from her numerous iconic photos, pictures of the early New York graffiti and street art scene that inspired writers, photographers, and scholars all over the world. So we'll have a kind of 45-minute conversation today. If you have any questions, you can ask in between. For the sake of the YouTube, we have to, I believe, make kind of we have to repeat them, if I understand correctly. And at the end, you know, the usual Q&A. So I would start with the photo. I hope it is shown out there.
We need to put this.
So it's not yet. It is,
yeah.
okay.
Okay.
So you said you want to start with this mural that was painted yesterday. It's not on yet?
This morning. I took this picture this morning.
This morning, okay.
Yeah.
With a simple message, fence must be torn down, which is a clear and big message against, on one side, anti-immigration policy in Slovenia, but also against fences, against the people who are protesting against today's extreme right-wing government in Slovenia. And I'm sure this mural will raise some controversy. It is so fresh, it was made yesterday afternoon, this morning.
Right.
So I believe that we are waiting for the
Yes,
response.
I can tell you, when I was taking this picture, a woman came up to me and she was angry and she was trying to talk to me about, and of course she was talking in Slovenian, so of course I couldn't answer, but I think she was angry about the content of that mural.
You see her temper, yes?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Okay, yeah.
She, and I'm like...
I can imagine.
No, I'm just thinking that.
I can imagine.
So, yeah.
It's better that you don't understand Slovenian in these cases, unfortunately. So usually the graffiti and street art are divided in more aesthetic ones and more political ones. So, you know, in scholarly terms, subcultural and political one. But in your view, as I understand your works, this is an artificial division. Maybe needed for analytic purposes, but in the real life, every graffiti or street art piece is a political and aesthetic statement at the same time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would go so far as to say that I feel that my act of taking pictures is a political statement. Being as my pictures are obviously positive to the creators of the graffiti and street art, in support of them without having to say it in words. So I also feel that I'm making a political statement.
And I also, I will quote you now from the Dazed magazine from the last March, from the new one. I quote you, I don't want to shoot something that was done with permission. It's an outlaw art. That's what makes it so thrilling. So for you, the most important dilemma is being between legal and illegal, not political aesthetic, which is, if I understand you right, the same thing, but maybe just two faces of the same work.
I like to document works in progress. I like to document the process. I often don't know what the work is going to be as I'm documenting it. So I don't make the decision, do I want to document this or not? I just go and hope for the best. I like to have an archive, so I want to put as many things as I can into that archive. Whether it's political or not political, that's not going to be a consideration up front for me.
Can you a little bit maybe elaborate, how do you see this photo? Why did you take this angle? Why did you...
Okay, this particular picture that we have up here, I liked it because I think people don't really understand the difference between what we call graffiti and what we call street art. And I see them as two different but overlapping phenomena. And I think this picture, you can see the street art in the background by Eskif. Obviously, that had to be a permission wall, because no illegal person is going to be able to paint that whole facade without the use of a lift. And the lifts are very expensive, so somebody had to give him permission and pay for the lift. The graffiti on the along the stairs is kind of classic letter graffiti, and I see, when I talk about graffiti, and now in New York, they're wanting not to call it graffiti, but style writing. It's about letters. So I see street art is more about images, graffiti is more about letters, the alphabet. And then we have a big billboard in the background, which is another kind of intervention in public space. And nobody ever complains about those, because they figure that, okay, the advertisers have paid for them, but some of those are the worst art, terrible aesthetics, advertising things that are bad for you, like cigarettes and alcohol and other things. And so I like this picture because it was a combination of the three, and I like the fact that there are two people walking up the steps, and their colors kind of interact well. So for me, this is an aesthetically pleasing photograph, which I'm also trying to create.
So to follow up what we were mentioning before, how to preserve, this creativity. And this is also the main topic of this year's festival. One of the main characteristics of graffiti and street art, which is both blessing and a curse, is that it is transient. It's ephemeral. So it's here today, gone tomorrow. So each of the photos that you make is a document not only of time, of place, of the cultural, political, social environment, but also of the author, of the group, and so on. So was making this permanent record one of the main motives of your work from the beginning?
Yeah,
you wanted to keep
yes. If graffiti wasn't ephemeral, if it was something that everybody could go and look at and take a picture of every day, I don't think I would have been interested in photographing it. The fact that I was going to have an exclusive photograph that nobody else would have, and definitely the trains. When Henry and I were shooting, we weren't telling each other when we knew that there was a good piece on the train. I think there was a little bit of competition. We both wanted to have the shot, and we wanted to be the only person with that shot. And there's still part of me that is like that. I'm more interested in taking pictures of something that I feel like other photographers can't take.
So you prefer graffiti than
and
church?
also I feel like there's a really important reason to have these pictures because it is a good record. We just heard that other talk. It's, in terms of the trains, it's a way that you can stop the trains and really analyze the pieces, which is, I think, why subway art was popular. It allowed people to see the art in a way they weren't able to see before. And yeah, I hope to keep that my archive will be a record.
So you find graffiti and trains and moving more interesting than churches, castles, and monuments, and other elements of urban culture.
The idea that the writers are willing to risk their lives sometimes to do these pieces is exciting and interesting. That they're willing to risk their lives for art, basically.
I believe that there's an emancipatory element in not just making graffiti and street art, but also in making a graffiti and street art archive. Graffiti and street art was traditionally made by individuals and groups that are on the margins. They don't exist. They are not in the mainstream. They have no other means to express their creativity. The only thing left is their mind, their imagination, and so on. And also kind of, I believe you mentioned in one of your texts, creativity from poverty, empowering through creating. This is the only thing that they have. That's the story of many neglected cultures and subcultures. Hip-hop, it started like this, breakdance, graffiti, street fashion, before that blues and so on. There's one quote that I will now tell, that you said in one text. My pictures are about the people rising above their environment. So this element of transgression of the existent.
You know, I'm not very good at analyzing the pieces, but one of the things that if you preserve them, then other people, social historians, can use those pieces to analyze the creators, the times, the neighborhoods. I would like my photographs to be accessible to other people for their analysis. So it isn't just what I read into them, it's what maybe researchers in the future will be able to when they look at the times.
So your work is kind of contribution to history of no names, as it is called, the forgotten, neglected, ignored histories of the corners of the big cities.
Yeah,
this was your ambition.
I would like to think that. That's, yes.
And there's a paradox because you refer many times to graffiti and street art as the biggest art movement in the world.
Well, I didn't say that at first, but I have heard other people say that, and now I'm repeating that. And if, in fact, that's true, and it may be true, that graffiti is the biggest art movement in the history of the world, I think it's underrepresented in major art museums.
I will quote now another great photographer, Robert Capa. He said, this is a famous quote, so many times repeated, if your pictures aren't good enough, you are not close enough. In your work, as I follow it, you're always close enough, not only to the motives, but also to the people that are doing it. This is also one of the characteristics of your work, being there.
Yeah,
no matter what time,
right. I'm not likely to go running around just taking pictures of walls. I really want to be there when the walls are being created. I think it gives you a different perspective on what it takes to make this art. And often it takes, complicated tools, many cans of paint, all kinds of difficulties that I want to see that.
Yes, because I see your work that in your work that you don't behave as an outsider, as kind of only voyeur or patronizing, a white lady separated from them, but.
I am an outsider.
But it's always a dialogue, Yeah. Because you mentioned many times, that you were taught to appreciate that kind of culture, taught to.
Graffiti writers always. Pretty much, if you had skills, you could be a graffiti writer, you could be in a crew. And my skill was photography, and they appreciated that. And I always tried to give the photos of the pieces back to the writers. So that was my contribution.
there's a nice quote, I learned from you and you learned from me, so kind of meet me halfway,
True. So now what are we going to do with this now that we have these archives?
Yeah, that's a question.
Right.
I saved for the last question.
Oh, okay.
So this will be kind of end. I'd like to ask you another element that is maybe not discussed enough when it comes to graffiti and street art, and this is gender element of your work. And I have two questions. You came across many graffiti writers. What is in the last 40 years or so, what is your experience in their role in the scene? Nancy MacDonald, 20 years ago, in her famous book about women in graffiti scene, was very skeptical about it. So this is one part of the question. And the second part is, you worked for different journals, National Geographic, New York Post, and so on. What is your experience of being a female photographer, especially female photographer of such an exotic topic as they are graffiti and street art or urban cultures?
Okay, what was the first question?
About role of female
in graffiti.
artist.
Back in the day, women were excluded. I think I've heard women rappers and breakers say the same thing, that the guys in crews did not want them in their crew with them, and that was pretty much the tradition. So the women that were able to write, like Lady Pink, there were a few out there, and were, they had to be strong and extra good. But this has changed. And I think it's changed all, across the board. And it's not just graffiti where it's changed. And women they're better athletes. They're doing jobs that they didn't do before. And women, maybe girls didn't want to be graffiti writers because it wasn't considered a girly thing to do. But I think really, I've come across a lot of really good female artists now.
So you see the situation is improving.
Changed. Okay. Yeah, it's really changed.
And a lady photographer?
And about photography, yeah, there were some difficulties. When I joined the New York Post, I was the only female photographer, and in fact, that worked to my advantage. I think that's why I was hired, because it was a time when they realized that they needed a woman photographer because it was an age of feminism in the United States. So I was lucky to be hired, but there was a lot of resistance from the guys at the time. They voted me out of their New York Press Photography Association because there were no women then, which meant that I couldn't enter their contest at the time. So, but I think I overcame that. And that's completely changed. I think there are more women in photography now than there are men.
You think it's improving?
Oh yeah, I do.
What about your relations with the photographic art world? There are some, scenes in the documentary that are very, very interesting. Not taken serious even now.
I don't like to call myself an artist, and I was never interested in having photography as art. But galleries approached me, and I realized I could actually sell prints. So I've made an attempt to do that because as I get older, I need a source of income. It's not easy being a freelance photographer, as I'm sure there are photographers out there that know that. It doesn't matter how good you are. It's just there's a lot of competition to make a career as a photographer. So this selling prints is one way I can survive in New York. It's a very expensive city. So I'm trying to do that. But it's not easy.
Which is, if I'm frank, which surprised me so much, because you're so many years in the scene, doing such a groundbreaking things, and still, but no, because it's a long story.
Right. It's especially I consider myself an editorial photographer. There aren't that many. I like print magazines. There aren't that many print magazines. I don't really want my photos all over the internet. That's a problem. I don't have a website. Unauthorized use of my photos is a problem. And it's so much, once they're out there, it's very, very hard to control how they're used. So.
But you're happy how they are used sometimes when the people are making graffiti and stencils out of it, out of your photos.
Of what?
When people are making, their own, graffiti and street art pieces out of your photos,
Okay. That's
You
flattering.
appreciate this.
I don't mind that. I don't mind that at all. When the combinations, remixes, mashups, whatever, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
I just don't really want like T-shirts with my photos.
Just now there's an exhibition of your photos in Berlin in the Urban Nation Museum of Contemporary Urban Art. And most of the photos, as much as I saw, are about writers in action. So as I understand, you see the action as important as the final work. That's why there are so many, writers doing their stuff, doing theirs in action, or even joining them, and not only, taking the result, the last piece.
Exactly.
So for you, as I understand, graffiti are not just graffiti. It's not still nature, ticho žitje, slovenščini, but kind of active culture rather than still nature. Making graffiti is as important as the graffiti itself.
Yeah, and especially when I really like to see like tools and techniques that are inventive and specific, site-specific, things that I've never seen before. People using a longer pole or a special way of stenciling or blowing on.
These guys yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday. I mean, that's what keeps me going.
So you're interested also in the story behind graffiti, before graffiti, around graffiti, not only graffiti as such.
Yeah. I have a lot of interests. I have a lot of interests, not just graffiti. I actually have interests that have nothing to do with graffiti.
I know. We're on a street art festival, that's why I'm more concentrated on this,
You know what? I would say I'm interested in photography. So for me, it's about photographing graffiti, and it's about trying to get that good photograph. And I'm working on framing the photograph and the technical part of the photograph. And often I'm thinking much more about the photography of it than I'm actually thinking about the subject matter. I'm like maybe waiting for just the right moment. I'm waiting for a combination.
It's hard to follow you. I was trying to follow you yesterday when you were taking this photo, so.
Yeah, I'm looking for, which angle, which light. I think people forget that I'm a photographer. I'm really not a graffiti historian. Graffiti's my subject matter, but.
But you do also graffiti history because of your work. Okay, digital revolution. It changed, our conception of many things or different fields. The Western civilization became even more visual as it was before. Now everyone is photographer. Everyone's got very, high quality camera phones. There are literally billions of photos that never existed every day, not every year, which has good and bad sides. And what is your view on this? In terms of taking photos and art?
When I first heard about this digital thing, I didn't believe it. I'm like, well, that's... somebody was explaining to me how you could send a photo through a telephone. Remember those dial-ups? And I'm like... It seemed ridiculous. And I thought, well, this is never going to catch on. And then when I saw, well, maybe people were buying computers, I'm like, well, I'm not going to ever do that. Like, they were expensive, and I'm not very technical. So I thought, this is impossible. I'm like, that's it, I'm out. But then I was in Chinatown, and I saw what I thought was an old lady who was probably younger than I am now, and she had a little digital camera, and she was taking pictures. And I'm like, if she can do it, I can do it. So I got into digital, and it turned out I love it. I love it much more than film. It's much better than film. It can do a lot more things than film. The ISO is better. I can adjust it better. I can work on these pictures myself. There's so many advantages to digital over film that I don't understand now why anybody wants to shoot film. So it was a difficult transition, but now that I'm in it, I love it.
What about the storing issue? Documenting, before, you had the drawers, and now you put on cloud, you put on... Where do you store all your
I do have a cloud. But it's expensive because I have millions of pictures. I have a big, maybe I can show you. I have a RAID system with terabytes. We're not talking megabytes anymore. Many terabytes of pictures, and I have to, of course, back up, because if you don't back up, everything could be lost. And I don't think I can't get it up. But I have two sides in my studio. I have the analog side, which are like hundreds of thousands of Kodachrome transparencies that are stored in drawers in plastic sheets. They're extremely difficult to access, no way to really search. If you lose a slide, you're never going to see it again. And then I have these terabytes full of digital pictures, which are organized, and I can search them, and it makes life a lot easier to retrieve a picture.
And you retrieve a picture. And you retrieve a picture when you need it. You have a special system.
I can find them because I have them stored in folders and files and metadata, everything.
Okay, so you're following what is happening in New York, not only in graffiti and street art scene, but also in other, whatever something interesting is going on, urban folklore, to use this term. How would you compare the situation now to the situation 30, 40 years ago? How the gentrification, touristification, what was discussed before, commodification changed in this 30, 40
everything has
years.
changed. It's hard to describe. I would say this graffiti and hip-hop and graffiti, street art wasn't even around, were really underground movements with a handful of people being interested. And now they're worldwide movements. So they've gone from, it's like day and night. How can I describe it? It's been an amazing transition for me to witness this gradual going above ground of all of this.
So you think the New York is today cleaner of graffiti, or the graffiti are, as it was discussed before, part of the whole tourist attraction of New York, like in a Mecca? Let's go to see
there's still pockets in New York where there's plenty of graffiti around. I don't run out to shoot every little last bit, but I will if somebody that I know calls me. Like somebody just told me that they're doing a street artist actually, a piece in an underground tunnel in New York, and would I like to shoot that? And I said yes, and I'm going to do that when I come back. So I will run out for the unusual piece, but not for the everyday.
But the trains are now clean.
The trains are now clean. Okay. Well, there's an occasional train, but they don't. And I did do a little. I've done a train or two, but they don't last. They get buffed immediately. They get pulled out of service and buffed.
And a final question from my side, and we'll leave the floor to the audience. You've been in Ljubljana for 22 hours or something.
Yeah, right.
Still really active, as I can follow you sending me photos. What's your first impression of the scene here, the graffiti that you saw, the pieces? I know that you're in a very specific environment here, with the people who love graffiti.
Well, graffiti, I was happy to see that there were a lot of nice letter pieces, especially in that underground underpass. I mean, I haven't even gone downtown here, so I don't know. I'm hoping to go on a little graffiti tour while I'm here, and I'm up for any adventures if anybody's listening. And I would really love to get a picture of a piece on a train, and I heard that there are trains here, but I haven't seen that yet. And so, I saw that there's plenty of talented writers in the area. I could see that from the underground, and lots of similar kinds of lettering. I recognize the traditions from New York, with things like halos, crowns, as part of the graffiti repertoire here, so that was fun to see.
Well, there's the specifics in the last year and something because of the government that we have so many extremely political graffiti from both sides, so it's really, the whole city is bombed with very explicit, all kind of, interventions from graffiti stickers and so on, so this is also an interesting, point, for
Well, you'll have to
see.
explain it to me,
Yeah,
because I can't read them.
Okay. Are there any questions now from the audience? Any comments? Any signs of life? Whatever.
Well,
Yes.
You seem to have interest in street graffiti, maybe more than, but maybe I'm wrong, than street graffiti. I was wondering, is that related because of your early days in photography, making photos of the trains, or is it something else that is your why you like the trains more than you prefer the streets?
The question is, may I just repeat because of
yeah.
do you prefer the graffiti on trains or the graffiti on the walls? If I understood right. Yes, making the photos.
The thing about the trains is that it's a real challenge to take that picture. It's probably something like hunting or fishing, where it's so hard to get that it's exciting and thrilling when you can actually do it. And I definitely appreciate the effort that goes into painting a train, because I know how difficult that is. But it's equally difficult to get the picture after the train is painted. And so I think it's the degree of difficulty that really gets me excited about it as a photographer. And I feel like a wall, anybody can take a picture of a wall. but it takes more skill to get the train. So, that's part of it, and it's also part that's what got me into graffiti in the beginning. So the idea that people are still painting trains, that would be a wonderful souvenir from Slovenia if I had that would be my most desired souvenir, would be to catch a photo of a painted train. You out there listening to me? Yes.
So
just
adventure.
let me know where to go.
Looking for adventure then.
Where is trackside in Slovenia?
Okay, thank you.
Any?
Okay.
Yes.
Have a question, please?
Yes.
Tell me, do you remember your first shooting of the train in New York? Bringing a train, and please the moment when you met Henry Shelton.
Okay.
When you meant Henry Chalfant,
The first
was about trains. Where was the first train with graffiti that you took photo?
Yeah. Okay. I didn't even begin to look at the trains until after it had been about a year after I met Dandi. I had been doing a project about kids being creative, and one child introduced me to Dandi, and then I photographed Dandi in his room, and he told me about these trains. It took me a year from when I first became interested in graffiti to going up to the Bronx. And the very first day I went up there, there was a Lee whole car sitting in the station that I got pictures of. And then the next day, there was a Blade whole car. It was like 2 amazing days, the very first time I went out to shoot trains. And it's hard to understand, but I didn't know about whole cars until I went out and looked at those. I had heard about them, but you would never see those cars. If you took the subway in New York, you would stand on the platform, the train would come. Usually it had graffiti on it, but not a whole car. And anyway, I never had even looked at the graffiti. I would just get on the train. So it wasn't after that year, it was 1980. Then I began going up to the Bronx as much as I could and waiting for hours and hours and hours for trains to go by. So that was, and I met Henry later. I met one of the graffiti writers, told me that somebody else was photographing trains and that he was going to have a show. And Henry had a show in a gallery, and I went to that show. And I introduced myself. And then he invited me to his studio. So it wasn't, we both have been doing a lot of documentation before we got together to do subway art.
you wrote somewhere that he was more interested in artistic aspect and you more in the cultural aspect of graffiti and street art,
Yeah,
the
I
whole
mean,
culture, everything that was connected with.
Okay, it's important to understand the difference between Henry's pictures and, you know, I have subway art here. Wait a minute. Henry's pictures are always, he isolated the trains and he shot them and then, I'm gonna find you. I always took the pictures of the trains in the context of the backgrounds. Two completely different approaches. Okay, these are Henry's pictures. They're just the strips of the trains. And my trains always had the backgrounds. And so that made subway art. Okay, this is how I took pictures. I don't know if you can,
with the buildings, with everything around, with people.
The first day I went out to shoot. Yeah, I always showed the buildings, the context. And I think that is partly why subway art was a success, because it showed both. Does that answer?
Your experience with One-Up Crew?
Oh, so I don't know whether anybody's seen it, but I did a book with the One-Up Crew, and they're the most notorious graffiti crew in the world, I would say, and they only do illegal graffiti, and they only write one-up. They do not write their individual names. And when I was in Berlin, they approached me, and they asked, would you like to do a book with us? And that was something I couldn't refuse. So we did a book, it's called 1 Week with One-Up. But it actually was more like a year and a half with One-Up. And they did all kinds of totally crazy graffiti pieces, you know, subway. Go online and look at it. So we didn't put our names on all the photographs because I was a little worried about going back to Berlin. So, But you can find them and the One-Up has a huge Instagram. Just go to the One-Up Instagram and you'll see.
We have a
I
question.
think that the guy here
row,
was
yeah.
first, yes.
I can't hear that.
So, can you speak a little bit louder, please? We don't hear you very well.
I said that at the moment there are so many writers doing trains here around, and that it shouldn't be a problem to find some.
Okay, good.
So I believe that
Okay, for YouTube audience, there are so many graffiti writers, you know, doing things on trains, you know, so
Yeah,
Marta will not
okay,
have
just
problem to find it.
Let me know. I'm here for another 4 or 5 days.
We're going to take a question from the back row now because a person has been waiting for a long time.
Yeah.
So my question is, did Dondi introduce you to other writers in New York? Or were the other writers suspicious maybe of you at first glance? How was this first interactions with writers in New York besides Dondi?
Was Dondi who introduced you to other writers? Were there any, you know, controversies? Any, you know, what are the relations between them?
Dondi, I did meet writers through Dondi, but I also, I met Futura, and Futura knew a lot of writers, and then I met Zephyr, and they all introduced me to different writers, but there's always been a lot of beef between writers, and so even today, some of those old school writers aren't talking to each other, so I always have to be kind of careful, even now, about who I'm bringing to what. So, because sometimes it's hard to remember who's talking to each other. But, you know, there are always rival crews, so yeah, there were problems.
Thank you. Yes? Speak up, please. We don't hear.
Did you have any experience with
With
With the Wonder Squad, did you have any experience with Wonder Squad?
the Vandal Squad.
Sorry.
No, yeah. You know, once I did a story with a Japanese reporter, And I asked her to please contact the Vandal Squad and that I would come along as the photographer, and she did. And so I was able to photograph Hickey and Ski, who were the two main Vandal Squad guys at the time. And I haven't published those photos yet, but I have a big new book coming out, and they're gonna be, I was worried that they would object, but they're long retired, that Vandal Squad. No, they never arrested me, but I did take pictures once of the two main Vandal Squad guys, and I have a new book coming out, and those are gonna be in the book.
When was that?
Soon.
No, the book.
Oh,
when did you take
like
photo?
81 or something.
Okay,
yeah.
okay, so a long time ago.
Yeah.
We have a question here in the second row.
Hi, Marta. I'm also a female photographer, so I can confirm that it's still difficult being a female photographer. So yeah, actually I wanted to ask you, like when you go out taking pictures, do you ever think about the possibility of being, I don't know, attacked or something like that, or just adrenaline is running through your veins?
You know, I always was, especially in New York, I was always worried that my cameras were going to get stolen. But after I got a few really good pictures, I decided it was worth it. I decided that if somebody did come up, and I would just give them. I tried to tell myself that, just give them away. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big risk. I'm willing to take some risks in order to get photos. Maybe not like huge. I think the writers take enormous risks to do their paintings, and I feel like my risk is not as big as their risk, because they could get arrested and be put in jail. I don't think I would be put in jail. But yeah, I mean, of course I worried about it a little bit, but not a lot.
But you heard that kind of reactions as you did today when you're taking these photos. I did, I'm not a photographer, but when I'm taking photos, I hear so many comments. Why are you, taking photos of this? This is pure blah, blah, and so on,
yeah.
You hear that kind of...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's you mean like negative comments from...
How do you react? Yeah. Someone has to do it.
I'm looking at the bigger picture here.
We have a question here in the third row. Okay, kind of losing this.
What is the difference? Like, do you see, are you aware of the difference of train painting then, 70s, 80s in New York, taking your name from Bronx to Brooklyn and back and all around, and now when it's more like the fun for the chosen one, it's like a show for like really with a lot of hardcore consequences that can occur.
So the question is the difference between the graffiti, making graffiti on trains back in the 70s and 80s when they were kind of communication medium, and today, which is more kind of exhibit.
Well, I mean, the biggest difference is, I would say the biggest difference, there's a huge difference, and social media is the biggest difference, because now, I mean, back, as you said, the trains would go from the Bronx through Manhattan, out to Brooklyn, and back again. That meant writers in Brooklyn could see the work of the writers in the Bronx and maybe never meet those guys, maybe not even know who those guys were. And now you've got live streaming of train painting, and hundreds of people can see it. Now, I don't know if that answers the question, but I just think it's a whole different world now that you can put your pictures on Instagram or wherever you're putting them, you know, and have so many people see them.
Another level of communication, in other words. Another level of communication, it's
Yeah,
a different way of...
As I said, it went from totally under, you know, how many people were going to see a whole car back in the day? You know, a handful would actually see it. And now you've got probably thousands seeing the pictures, not the actual train. Like how many see the actual train today? I don't know. Probably the same thing. You know, even in Europe, they probably don't get to see a whole car very often. And I think in Germany, they also clean the windows quickly. So if you have a whole car, the windows are going to be gone.
We have a question over there.
Yes. Yes.
Was there any connection between your work and the two big movies, Star Wars and Wild Style?
What's the movie?
Is there any connection between your works and the two movies, Star Wars and Wild Style?
The only connection was that, like, I know I did the stills for Charlie Ahern, all the Wild Style photographs I took for Charlie, and that Wild Style wall was painted right below my apartment where I still live in Riverside Park. If you come to New York, I can show you exactly where it was painted. There's little bits of paint still on the wall. And I knew Charlie's brother, John Ahern, and John introduced me to Charlie, so I knew all about when that was being filmed, and I introduced Charlie to the Rocksteady crew, and he put them in his film. And Henry, I also shot stills for Henry, and of course Henry was working on Style Wars so, you know, I knew the cast, and I have lots of pictures of them filming Style Wars. But otherwise, no, I didn't really work on those films. I wasn't part of deciding what went into the films.
Thank you.
There was a question over there.
My question is, since through your lens,
Speak up.
Yeah.
through your lens and through your eyes as a photographer, you show us that everybody in the room is not from New York, so you had the chance to transport the New York movement to Europe and all around the world. And if you ever think about how your lens shaped and framed the project itself, like kind of editorial point of view, I mean the book itself, you have an editor, and you yourself as a photographer, I guess you choose one picture instead of another, or you took a good picture of one piece instead of another, and so on and so on. And so if you have any think about this point of view, or if you ever thought about, and if you ever think about, okay, I could have done this in Italy, if you check what was graffiti in the 80s and what it is now in terms of your contributions.
Help me.
So the question is about the selection. What do you select? You know, bringing, you know, the photos. You know, taking photos in New York and bringing it to the global audience. You know, what is your point of selection? What is your, you know, line of, you know, this is the
Now or back in the day?
Back in the
For
days,
Subway art. You mean how did we choose?
back in the days?
You know,
Back in the days, you know. So,
you know.
what was your criterion? What was your you know,
Okay.
point of selection? What
we-
did you bring to the world?
I was very interested in getting my best photographs published. And so I really, for me, that was my primary reason for wanting to do a book, was to get my best photographs published. And I didn't really care who had done that particular train if I thought it was a good photograph. On the other hand, we tried to include as many different writers as we possibly could in the book. So that was why, for example, I have pictures, Henry probably has pictures of the same trains that I have, but if my photograph was a better photograph, then we would use my photograph. I had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trains that I never published, and these are going to be in my new book. And Roger Gassman, who has done many graffiti events, came to New York. He went through probably 1 million slides I had old files that I was never going to look at. He pulled it, this is like a 388-page book of trains. It's mostly trains, all kinds of unpublished pictures. And I was actually surprised to see that I had missed some, what I consider now to be good pictures. So it was, let's say it was not such an organized process of selection.
It went organically.
Yeah, and also it had, at the time, the original Subway Art is only 96 pages. It's a small book, and we did not have complete control over this book or the layout. Like, I don't like the cover of the original book. I prefer this one better. After all, the publisher pretty much made all the decisions. Subway Art was not even our name for the book. We were going to call it Art Transit. It completely changed from our original proposal, but we had so many rejections for that book that we were just happy to get it published. And they often made editorial decisions on which pictures to use.
Thank you.
We have
Another
time
question,
for
yes?
1 or 2 more questions.
Yes. Yeah, please, Helena.
I can't hear.
A person is asking if you ever were approached by the police to snitch on the graffiti artist that you're taking pictures of. I mean, whose work you're taking pictures of.
I still didn't hear her. What? What was it?
Your approach,
My approach?
If you were approached by the police to snitch,
Would I snitch on a writer?
No, if you were ever approached by the police to snitch on an author, yes.
No, never. They never, which, it's surprising, but they never came. I mean, obviously, my name was out there and the cops could have come, but they didn't. I mean, I think the relationship between the cops and the writers, it was a really interesting one. I mean, I think the Vandal Squad actually enjoyed kind of running after them, but not really doing any, and knowing they had a whole collection. The Vandal Squad had a collection of black books and pieces, and they knew the names of the writers, and they didn't really need me to snitch on them. I think the Vandal Squad probably knew more than I did about who did which piece, but they didn't always pursue the writers. So they were fair in most cases.
They left you. Okay, last question.
Do you have a favorite graffiti scene?
A favorite graffiti scene or?
Scene, yeah.
Oh, well, New York. Whatever scene I'm in is my favorite scene. And right now, my favorite scene is the Slovenian graffiti scene.
Okay, one last question. I saved for myself. Okay, lady there.
I never like to play favorites. I have a lot of favorite graffiti artists, and I recently did a little show with Scheme, and Scheme is in Star Wars. If you've seen Star Wars, and there's a very funny scene with his mother where they're talking back and forth, and Scheme tagged a lot of my pictures, and we had a little show, and we're going to do it again in the Netherlands, and I felt like his work was underappreciated. So if you look at Subway Art, look at Scheme's work again. He has a definite style, and he did a lot of work on trains. And I think he's interesting and a good artist.
I have a last.
One of my favorites.
I saved the last question for myself.
Okay.
Classical question. What are your future plans? What are you planning to do?
Future plans.
Classic question. So.
Yeah, I don't. Do I have a bucket list? No. I mean, One of the things I like about what I'm doing now is the randomness of the invitations that I'm getting, for example, to come to Slovenia. I've never been to Slovenia before, and I get a little email and it says, would you like to come to Slovenia? I'm like, yes. but before that, I never thought about going to Slovenia. So I'm actually, I'm open to see what happens. I don't really have any definite plan.
Before we conclude, we have one more question.
Okay.
It's going to be probably the last question. It's here on the live stream. And the question is, what is Marta's vision on the future of the graffiti?
I would think that it's going to continue as it is, developing more styles, using more techniques. I would like to see major art museums embrace graffiti. The Museum of Modern Art in New York seems totally uninterested. Their view of graffiti is Haring and Basquiat. I think they haven't really looked closely at some of the styles. Amazing, incredible graffiti going on out there. These artists are doing it for each other, I just think they should be more recognition as a serious, as the biggest art movement in the history of the world. That would be I would like to see that happen in the future.
Okay, I would like to thank Marta Cooper for her views.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I'm looking forward to the photos that you will take here in this week.
Yes.
So
I'm looking forward to taking a lot of pictures.
Cool.
So thank you, Marta. Thank you, Mitja, for this really exciting conversation. Thanks to everyone who posted up their questions. Just a couple of technical things. We'll be back in 15 minutes. So 15 minutes past 6, we'll continue with the third panel of the day, actually, about self-archiving practices from books to social media. We're going to hear from some very exciting artists, so stay tuned, both on live stream and here in Kino Šiška. Thank you.